"Excuse me, sir. This pool is for actual residents, not guests who wandered in." Karen's voice slices through the summer air, sharp and cold. Without hesitation, she smacks her clipboard down onto the open book resting on Lamar's lap. The hardcover flies off his knees, skids across the marble pool deck, and splashes into the shallow water. Pages ripple, soaked and curling, ink beginning to bleed. Lamar doesn't flinch. He doesn't respond. His plain white t-shirt clings slightly as droplets of water spot his chest. But he just stares, first at the book, then at the woman standing over him like a judge passing sentence. Beside her, the security guard shifts, hand hovering over his radio, eyes narrowing. "You people always think you're entitled to everything," Karen mutters, more to the gathering crowd than to Lamar. "You don't just get to show up and claim space like it's yours." She turns her back with finality, unaware of the silence tightening around her, because she has no idea the man she just humiliated by the pool is the one who paid to build it. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Lamar Clark sat alone by the infinity edge pool of Ocean View luxury residences, his feet stretched out on a cushioned lounger, a hardcover copy of Leadership in Crisis open across his lap. He wore a plain white t-shirt, simple navy swim shorts, and a calm expression that rarely left his face. From a distance, he blended in with the serenity of the high-end complex, unbothered, unreadable, and unmistakably at peace. The water sparkled behind him, catching the late afternoon sun, while the rest of the deck hummed with soft conversation, lazy footsteps, and the occasional splash from the shallow end. To anyone not paying close attention, Lamar might have seemed like a guest, a quiet man enjoying the warmth. But to those who watched longer, the way he folded page corners precisely, the stillness in his posture, the way his eyes didn't dart or scan like someone new, they might have seen something else. A familiarity, a kind of ownership. Only no one ever watched that long. Not until someone decided he didn't belong. She came striding down the pool deck like she owned it. Karen Williams, mid-50s tall, stern, dressed in a perfectly pressed navy sheath dress, and kitten heels that clicked against the Italian marble like gavel strikes. Her clipboard was tucked tightly beneath her elbow, though she held it as if it were a search warrant. Trailing a few steps behind her was Brad Shunn, the on-duty security officer, tall, built like a former college athlete, with a tension in his jaw that betrayed his discomfort. As they approached Lamar, neither one offered greeting. No smile, no question, just a direct march toward him with the grim determination of people convinced they were about to fix something broken. Karen stopped short, 3 feet away, her eyes raking across Lamar's casual appearance, clearly unsatisfied. Brad's hand hovered near his radio. Lamar didn't move. He simply marked his page, folded the corner, and placed the book neatly on the table beside him. Then he looked up, gently, as if noticing them for the first time, and asked with quiet curiosity, "Is there some kind of problem?" Karen stepped forward like she was settling a neighborhood dispute, except her voice had the clipped authority of someone accustomed to not being challenged. "I'm Karen Williams," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard like a ticking clock, "head of the Community Standards Committee. I've lived here for 3 years, and I've never seen you before. Do you have a member card?" Brad shifted beside her, adjusting his security badge as he stepped closer. "Ma'am's right," he added, "try to match her firmness. This area is reserved for residents and registered guests only. We'll need to see your ID, sir." Lamar tilted his head slightly, not offended, not defensive, just surprised. "I live here," he replied. His tone was steady, calm, like someone stating the color of the sky. But that only seemed to fuel Karen's disbelief. "Live here," she repeated, eyes narrowing. "Where exactly?" "The townhomes on the other side of the complex." She scanned his outfit like it was a giveaway. "Because this pool is for high-rise residents only, the ones who actually pay for the premium amenities." A few heads turned at her words. The quiet hum around the pool began to shift. Mrs. Chin from the 14th floor lowered her sunglasses. A father paused mid-step with his toddler, the fluties on the child's arms squeaking faintly in the still air. Even the maintenance crew near the equipment shed stole glances. The mood had changed. Brad pulled out his phone, scrolling rapidly. Checking the registry, he said, more to the crowd than to Lamar. All pool usage must be logged per our bylaws. A few seconds passed. Sorry, sir. No record of a reservation under Clark today. Lamar raised an eyebrow. Reservation. Karen noted quickly. New policy. Implemented last month to prevent crowding. All residents must schedule usage 24 hours in advance. It's posted on the community app. Lamar tapped his fingers lightly against his thigh, as if considering something deeper than pool rules. Then, with complete composure, he said, I was hoping to swim a few laps before dinner. Is there perhaps some kind of exception process? The question wasn't defiant. It was precise, polite, but it hung in the air like a challenge no one had expected. Karen's fingers tensed around the clipboard, tapping harder now, the sound sharp and erratic. Exception process, she repeated, her voice rising half a step. Sir, the rules apply to everyone. We don't make exceptions just because someone strolls in without notice. Her gaze swept him up and down again, sharper this time, especially when certain people assume they can access spaces clearly meant for those who actually belong. Brad's radio hissed to life, and he pressed it to his mouth quickly. Control, this is Unit 7, pool deck. We may have a possible trespasser. Individual claims to be a resident. No record found. A thin pause. Copy that, 7. Knee back up. Brad glanced at Lamar, who still hadn't moved. Negative for now. Situation manageable. Lamar remained seated, watching the faces shift around him. Some curious, others uneasy. A mother pulled her child away from the edge. Karen turned the page on her clipboard. Lips pursed. The air grew dense, not from heat but from tension. Lamar adjusted slightly in his chair, then asked, still level, could you direct me to the section in the bylaws that outlines this registration rule? And for the first time, Karen didn't have an answer ready. Karen froze, her pen mid-air, suddenly unsure. She flipped pages, brows furrowed, scanning line after line on the clipboard like she could will a policy into existence. It's in the updated guidelines, she mumbled, glancing at Brad for backup. Brad's fingers moved anxiously over his screen. Something about guest limits, maybe under a minute use? But he didn't sound confident anymore. Lamar waited. No urgency, no raised voice, just presence. The kind of stillness that draws attention without demanding it. Karen snapped her clipboard shut. Regardless, she said firmly, voice regaining some edge, you're making families uncomfortable. She waved an arm toward the quiet pool deck, where onlookers now stood frozen, some with phones in hand, others peeking over sunglasses, pretending not to stare. A ripple of unease ran through the space. Lamar looked around slowly. Uncomfortable? He repeated, more curious than confrontational. A child clung to his mother's leg, whispering. A man in swim trunks adjusted his towel and turned away. No one spoke, but everyone watched. And as Brad shifted nervously, Lamar reached calmly into his swim bag, pulled out his phone, and dialed. Hi, Sarah, he said. Could you check something for me about pool policies? The deck fell utterly silent. Who are you calling? Karen demanded, her voice slicing through the silence, strained with suspicion. Someone who can clarify the policy, Lamar replied evenly, still on hold, thumb gently tapping the phone's edge. Brad took a step closer, his security stance stiffening. Sir, if this is some sort of delay tactic, I need to inform you we take all security violations very seriously. Security violations? Lamar raised an eyebrow. For sitting by a pool. For trespassing, Karen corrected sharply, lifting her clipboard again like a shield. For ignoring rules and creating discomfort. We have standards here. As if summoned by drama, another figure approached. a woman in her 60s, thin, elegant in an ivory linen set. "Is there a problem, Karen?" she asked sweetly, though her eyes scanned Lamar like a museum artifact. "Mrs. Patterson." Karen turned quickly, regaining composure. "This gentleman refuses to comply with community regulations. Which unit are you visiting?" Patterson asked, her tone soft but loaded. Lamar ended his call without answering. He looked up at them all, Karen, Brad, Patterson, the growing crowd, and said with a quiet finality, "I'm not visiting. I live here." That sentence cracked something, and everyone felt it. More residents trickled onto the deck, drawn by murmurs and message threads buzzing across the building's group chat. A cluster formed near the lounge chairs, hushed but visibly eager. Karen seized the moment. She stepped forward, clipboard raised like a judge's gavel, her voice amplified for effect. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her tone rich with righteous indignation, "we have someone here who believes rules don't apply to him, who's refused to show proof of residency, and continues to disrupt our shared space." A few gasps, a few exchanged glances. Some simply watched with quiet fascination, phones discreetly raised. Lamar didn't react. He remained seated on the edge of his chair, hands clasped loosely, observing the show like a sociologist in the field. Karen turned back to him, voice tighter now. "I'm asking one more time. Do you have proper authorization to use this pool?" "As I've said," Lamar replied with calm finality, "I live here." A voice cut through the air from behind. "Where exactly?" Robert Sterling had arrived. His tailored suit caught the light, his expression smug with authority. "I know every resident in this building," he declared, "and I've never seen you before." Karen's eyes lit up at Robert's arrival, her spine straightening like a soldier under command. "Thank you, Robert. I was just explaining that this gentleman refuses to follow our policies." "Policies that seem applied rather selectively," Lamar said softly. That single line turned heads. Robert's jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing implied," Lamar replied. "Just observing. I've been here 20 minutes. I've seen a dozen people use the pool. None of them were asked for ID." Brad shifted uncomfortably. "Those are known residents, sir." "Known how?" Lamar asked. "Did you verify them by name, unit, registry, or did you simply assume they belong because they looked like they belonged?" The question cut through the air, subtle but surgical. A murmur stirred the crowd. A woman glanced at her husband. A man slowly lowered his phone. Karen flushed. "That's completely different," she snapped. "Those are contributing members of our community. They've invested here. They uphold our standards." "And I don't?" Lamar asked, still sitting still calm. Robert leaned in closer, voice dropping to a quiet growl. "You don't understand what kind of place this is, do you? This isn't just a pool. This is a $50 million private facility." Robert straightened, gesturing broadly as if lecturing a misbehaving student. "People here have worked their whole lives to afford this. We've earned the right to enjoy peace without interruptions. When someone tries to sneak in, they're stealing from those who actually belong." Karen pulled out her phone with theatrical flair. "This needs to go on record. The community deserves transparency." She hit record, her voice slipping into performance mode. "This is Karen Williams documenting a trespassing situation at Ocean View's private pool. Despite being asked repeatedly to verify his identity, this individual refuses to comply." Brad shifted his weight, visibly sweating now. "Ma'am, maybe we should handle this through the office first." But Robert waved him off. He had his chance. Lamar, still seated, reached for his phone. Everyone tensed. Karen paused her recording. Brad instinctively touched his radio. Robert stepped back. Lamar didn't raise his voice. He simply sent a message. "Activate Protocol 7. Full documentation required." Then placed the phone gently back on the table. His gaze swept across the crowd. "I've been called many things in my life," he said softly, "but I've never been called a thief." And in that moment, something shifted in the air, and nobody could name it yet, but everyone felt it. The silence after Lamar's words wasn't empty. It was electric. Even the kids in the shallow end had gone still, sensing a change that couldn't be explained. Karen's phone trembled slightly in her hand, the live stream still running, though she wasn't speaking anymore. Robert's brows furrowed, trying to make sense of the quiet power behind Lamar's composure. He leaned in again, this time narrowing his eyes. "Let's cut to the chase," he said. "What's your income?" A few audible gasps shot through the crowd. Even for Ocean View, where wealth wasn't whispered, but worn like jewelry, that question crossed a line. Lamar blinked once. "Excuse me. You heard me. If you claim to live here, you should be able to afford the $2,800 HOA dues, plus special assessments, plus the maintenance fees. So let's hear it." Karen jumped in like a co-counsel in court. "The pool alone costs us $400 per unit monthly. It's not just water and tiles. It's about the standard we maintain." Robert folded his arms, smug. That level of commitment usually excludes certain people. That final phrase hovered like a poisonous fog, spoken loud enough for everyone to hear, yet soft enough to feign deniability. But no one missed it. Lamar didn't react to the insult. Instead, he reached again for his phone, calm, deliberate. 3 people visibly flinched. Karen lowered her phone. Brad's hand moved instinctively to his radio. Robert took a half step back, but Lamar didn't call anyone. He typed. Fast. Silent. Intentional. Then he set the phone back down. "Just sending a message," he said, tone unreadable. "You'll understand shortly." He leaned back slightly in his chair, not as a retreat, but as a quiet reclaiming of space. Around him, the crowd stood motionless. Brad's radio crackled again. "Unit 7, what's your status?" He hesitated. "Control, I think. I think we might need to confirm something." "What kind of confirmation?" came the clipped reply. Brad swallowed hard. "Can you check the database for a resident named Lamar Clark?" The pause that followed felt endless. Then, faint static and a voice. "Unit 7, please confirm. Lamar Clark." "Affirmative." The next pause was longer. Then came a sound that no one expected. An open mic expletive, followed by a dropped headset. It cut across the pool deck like a lightning bolt. Karen blinked rapidly, then opened her search app. Clark, she mumbled. Clark Industries. The name spread through the crowd like gasoline finding a spark. Lamar Clark. Phones lit up as fingers danced across screens. The murmurs grew into sharp intakes of breath. Karen's eyes scanned her screen in disbelief. Profile after profile, headline after headline. Founder of Clark Industries. Net worth, $2.8 billion, she whispered. Her hand dropped. Her face turned pale. Robert Sterling stiffened, his eyes flicking between Lamar and the words on his assistant's phone. Jessica, who had just arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice low but trembling, you asked me to brief you on the trespassing incident." But her eyes locked onto Lamar. Then she turned to Robert. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding. A big one." Lamar remained still, letting the air do the talking. The only sound was the soft hum of the pool jets and the occasional buzz of new notifications. The people who had gathered expecting a spectacle were now watching a reckoning. Karen slowly turned her phone back to her own live stream. Still running, still broadcasting. Now with over 800 viewers and climbing. The digital world had just witnessed everything they'd said. And now, it was watching them unravel. Lamar stood slowly. Not with drama, not with aggression. Just enough to command the space that had been denied to him minutes earlier. His hand reached calmly into his bag, producing a leather wallet, sleek, understated, embossed with gold trim. From it, he withdrew a single card and placed it gently on the table. The words gleamed in the sun. Ocean View Luxury Residences, founding member, owner's circle, penthouse, Lamar Clark. No one spoke. Even Brad's radio had gone silent, as if the control room didn't dare interrupt. I moved into the penthouse 3 years ago, Lamar said evenly. Before that, I spent 18 months living in a construction trailer on this site, overseeing every inch of this property's development. He picked up his phone, tapped twice, and a set of architectural blueprints appeared. The original pool design was smaller. I paid $2.3 million out of pocket to expand it. The marble deck you're standing on? My decision. The spy jets? My upgrade. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. His words landed heavier than any confrontation. And in the stunned quiet that followed, no one dared look him in the eye, except the cameras still rolling. Jennifer Walsh's voice came through Lamar's phone, crisp and professional on speaker. Mr. Clark, we have David Shun from Legal and Michael Rodriguez from Community Relations on conference. We're aware of the incident at Ocean View. Everyone froze again. Karen's phone slipped in her grip. Jessica looked like she'd stopped breathing. Thank you, Jennifer, Lamar said calmly. We'll need a full review of the management contract and the HOA leadership structure. This isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a systemic failure. He turned to Karen, who now looked as though she might faint. And since you're live streaming this, he added gently, we'll consider it a helpful record of events. She slowly turned the phone screen toward herself. Over 22,000 viewers and climbing. Robert stepped back, his mouth dry. We didn't know. Lamar finally looked him in the eye. That's the problem, he said quietly. You needed to know who I was before you could offer basic respect. Around them, silence wasn't just awkward. It was accusatory. Every person standing there was forced to reckon with what they had just allowed, encouraged, or silently condoned. And a man they thought they could shame now held all the power. Lamar's phone rang again. He picked it up without flinching, pressed speaker, and said clearly, Clark Industries, this is Lamar. The name alone echoed like a gavel strike. On the other end, a woman's voice replied with precision, Mr. Clark, this is Jennifer again. We have legal reviewing Ocean View's updated immunity policies. We're also fielding calls from the mayor's office. The story is gaining traction online. Karen looked down at her phone and went pale. Her live video now had over 35,000 views. Comments flooded the screen. Angry, shocked, unforgiving. Lamar Clark, harassed in his own building. One headline already trended. Robert tried to regroup. This was a misunderstanding. A terrible, unintentional, was it? Lamar asked, I sharp now. Because I didn't see hesitation when you questioned my right to exist here. I saw certainty, conviction. You didn't ask. You assumed. Karen reached for the stream's end button, but hesitated. The damage was done. Around them, no one spoke. No one moved. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was shameful. And Lamar stood at its center, not as a victim, but as the man holding the mirror to their faces. Brad's radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't a polite check-in. Chun, what the hell is going on over there? Barked a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Brad froze. Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding. The supervisor's voice dripped with disbelief. We've had calls from the mayor's office, Clark Industries Legal, and 2 news networks. You want to explain how checking a pool pass turned into a national PR disaster? Brad opened his mouth, then closed it again. But before he could answer, Lamar raised a hand. If I may, he said, turning toward the radio. This is Lamar Clark. I'd like to speak with your head of security. Another pause. Then came a very different tone. Mr. Clark, sir, this is Captain Morris. I sincerely apologize for this incident. We'll begin termination procedures immediately. No, Lamar interrupted. I don't want Brad fired. I want your entire team retrained. I want a report detailing how bias went unchecked for this long. Around him, jaws slackened. Even Brad looked stunned. Not by the mercy, but by the precision. Lamar wasn't just making a point. He was building accountability. On record, in public, with surgical clarity. The collapse came fast. Faster than anyone expected. Karen's phone buzzed repeatedly. Group chats, board threads, private messages. Her screen lit up with resignation requests from fellow committee members, statements distancing themselves and demanding she step down. We'll be voting on new HOA leadership next week. One message read, "Your resignation would be appreciated before then." She swayed slightly where she stood, still live streaming, still exposed. Jessica's phone rang next. Her face fell. "What?" she whispered into the receiver. "Effective immediately?" Her hand dropped to her side. The calls still live. "They just fire me," she said to no one in particular. Sterling Industries doesn't want the liability. Robert's gaze darted between Lamar and Jessica, panic finally cracking his polished facade. "Wait, this is spiraling too far. Let's not be rash. I mean, contracts can be restructured." His own phone rang. He answered shakily, turned away, then stopped mid-sentence. "Terminated?" he repeated, color draining from his face. "All of them." He turned back toward Lamar, barely breathing. "Clark Industries just pulled out. $2.8 million in annual contracts. Gone." The man who once lectured Lamar about earning his place now looked like he couldn't find his footing on his own marble floor. Karen stared at her phone screen in horror. The comments flooded faster than she could read. "This is what racism looks like in real time. Imagine harassing the man who built your home. Karen Williams just tanked her whole reputation. Live." Her hand shook as she tried to end the stream, but it was too late. Clips were already circulating. Hashtags trending. Her name forever attached to this. She opened her messages, strangers posting her address, her husband's business, her children's school. Her voice cracked. "I'm getting threats," she whispered. "Death threats." Lamar turned to her then, and his voice cut through the thick, suffocating air. "That's not justice," he said. "That's mob mentality, and it's not what I stand for." He picked up his phone again. Jennifer released a statement. "We will not condone harassment or threats toward any individuals involved today. What happened was wrong, but this isn't the answer." For a moment, the crowd seemed to exhale, some out of guilt, some out of shame. Lamar didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He simply reminded them of something they had all forgotten, that accountability and cruelty are not the same thing, and dignity isn't conditional. As the crowd thinned, some slinking away, others frozen in place, Lamar remained by the pool's edge, still in his white shirt and navy shorts, but now unmistakably in command. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice firm but never raised. "I didn't reveal my identity to assert power. I did it to expose assumptions, to show what happens when appearance overrides truth." He stepped forward slightly, and no one dared move. "Some of you believed I didn't belong here based on what? My clothes? My skin? The absence of designer labels." His eyes met Robert's. "You demanded my income before granting me dignity. Then, Karen, you reached for your phone, not to document injustice, but to perform control." He turned, addressing the crowd now. "But here's the hardest part. It wasn't just them. It was the silence. The way so many stood and watched, recorded, whispered, chose comfort over courage. A long pause. No one interrupted. Respect isn't a transaction. It's not reserved for the powerful. It's a baseline. And the moment we tie it to status, we lose the thread of community entirely. No one applauded. No one dared. But in that stillness, they listened, maybe for the first time. Lamar let the silence linger, not to dominate it, but to let the weight of his words settle and places applause never could. He walked slowly back to his chair, picked up the book that had been knocked earlier, Leadership in Crisis, now dry, though slightly bent at the corners. He ran his thumb along the pages, then looked up one last time. "I helped build this place," he said. "Not just the buildings, but the idea of what a community could be. But no design, no amount of granite or glass can protect us from the rod of assumption." Karen lowered her eyes. Brad looked down at his feet. Robert took a full step back, as if the truth itself had physical weight. "The real danger," Lamar continued, "isn't what happened today. It's how easily it happened. How normal it felt to so many of you. That should scare all of us. He paused. And if you only offer kindness when power is present, then it was never kindness to begin with. Then he sat down, reopened his book, and returned to page 47, as if reclaiming the moment that had been stolen from him hours ago. And no one dared interrupt him again. The fallout began before Lamar even left his seat. Robert Sterling's phone rang again, this time with a classical ringtone that once signaled prestige, but now sounded like impending doom. He answered with trembling hands. Sterling Industries. His face shifted through a spectrum of disbelief, dread, and silent pleading. What do you mean, terminated? He whispered. Effective immediately? He looked up at Lamar like a man searching for a life preserver. They pulled everything, he muttered, dazed. 3 contracts, $2.8 million annually. He swallowed hard. My biggest client. Lamar didn't gloat. He simply said, the contracts weren't canceled because of who I am. They were canceled because of who you revealed yourself to be. Across the deck, Karen's screen still glowed. She no longer held it upright. Now it rested on the arm of her chair, the comments flashing mercilessly. Karen, the HOA queen, just destroyed her life in real time. This is how you lose everything in 10 minutes flat. Notifications rolled in from local news stations requesting interviews for the wrong reasons. Her hand shook. She didn't cry. She simply stared forward, as if waiting for the marble floor to open and swallow her whole. Karen clutched her phone as if it were burning in her hands. They're posting my address, she whispered. My husband's work number. My kid's school. People are threatening us. Her voice cracked. Not defensive anymore, just hollow. Lamar turned to her slowly. His tone didn't change. It didn't need to. That's not justice, he said. That's digital bloodlust. And I won't be part of it. He dialed again. Jennifer, he said into the phone, without a formal statement. Clark Industries condemns any threats or harassment directed at individuals involved in the Ocean View incident. We believe in accountability, not cruelty. A long pause followed. Then a few heads nodded, not in approval, but in awakening, as if realizing that dignity didn't come from status, but from restraint. What happened here wasn't just about me, Lamar continued. It was about how quickly ordinary people justify extraordinary cruelty if they feel the person on the receiving end doesn't belong. His eyes swept the crowd, not to shame, but to challenge. We talk about standards, but what standard tolerates public humiliation based on nothing but assumption? No one answered, because the truth didn't need one. It was already loud enough. Lamar stepped toward the center of the pool deck, now surrounded by fragments of silence, broken phones, abandoned towels, and reputations scattered like debris. Let me ask you something, he said quietly. How many of you watched this happen and said nothing? He let the question hang. How many of you whispered, but didn't speak up? Watched, but didn't intervene? Recorded, but didn't question? His eyes met a woman clutching her child close. A man who had live-streamed the confrontation, but now held his phone down by his leg. We focus on Karen, on Robert, on Brad. But silence is a decision too. One that tells the person being mistreated, you're alone. You let that sink in. And the truth is, I've seen this before. Not just here, in boardrooms, at fundraisers, at airports. I've watched people shrink into silence the moment decency gets uncomfortable. He paced slowly. We all want to believe we do the right thing. But justice doesn't begin when a camera rolls or a title is revealed. It begins the moment someone is treated unfairly, and we choose to either accept it or stop it. This time, a few people looked away, because now, it wasn't just about Lamar. It was about them. Lamar let his gaze sweep across the pool deck, once a place of leisure, now transformed into a mirror. I don't expect perfection, he said, but I do expect reflection. I expect people to look at what happened here and ask themselves, what would I have done if he wasn't a CEO? He paused, letting the weight of that question fall on every shoulder. because it shouldn't have mattered who I was. That's the point. But it did. And if today teaches us anything, it's that our community is only as strong as its weakest assumption. A gentle breeze stirred the surface of the pool, shimmering like the moment itself might dissolve. You don't fix this with apologies or with PR statements. You fix it with behavior, with conversations around dinner tables, with the way you greet your neighbors, with the way you check your assumptions before they become actions. A murmur ran through the crowd. Not resistance, not applause, but thought. Lamar nodded once, slowly. If you truly care about community standards, he added, then start by making dignity one of them. And with that, the pool deck, still glowing in the golden hour, began to shift. Not outwardly, but inside. Lamar turned back toward his chair, the same lounge where all of this began. His steps were unhurried, his presence unchanged. He didn't storm out. He didn't stay to bask in victory. He simply picked up his book, shook off a bit of dust from the cover, and lowered himself into the seat. Then, as if nothing had happened, he flipped to page 47. Silence stretched across the deck. Not an awkward silence, an intentional one, as if the entire community held its breath, unsure if it should apologize or simply vanish. Lamar didn't need either. He'd already said what mattered. He leaned back, eyes on the page, posture relaxed. And in that stillness, he reclaimed what had been taken from him, his peace. Across the deck, a few people stepped away, heads down, phones forgotten. Others lingered, unsure whether to say something or stay quiet. But Lamar didn't look up, didn't speak again, because he didn't have to. His point had been made, not with power plays or shouting matches, but with stillness, clarity, and truth. And in that moment, beneath the setting sun, the community didn't just see a CEO. They saw a man they had misjudged, and a version of themselves they might never forget. Later that night, that video went viral. Not just because a billionaire CEO had been harassed at his own pool, but because of what he said after. The quiet conviction, the refusal to retaliate, the call to something higher than outrage. Lamar's story didn't end with him turning the tables. It began with a question he left echoing in every viewer's mind. What would you have done? Not if you were rich, not if you had power, but if you were watching someone being diminished based on nothing but appearance. Would you speak up? Would you step in? Or would you stay quiet and let the crowd grow louder? The truth is, most people don't have Lamar's resources. Most won't get the chance to reveal they're the CEO. They'll just be judged, mistreated, and left to carry the weight alone. That's why your voice matters. That's why who you choose to be, in those small, unnoticed moments, shapes the world we live in. So next time, don't wait to find out who someone is before treating them with respect. Do it because of who you are. That's where real power begins.